Afternoon, good evening. 4 o'clock or 4:02. We call this Independent Ethics Board meeting Tuesday, March 15th, 2022 order. I recognize that Chairman Ray is with us remotely, as well as our member Mrs. Costa. So at this time, we'll have a roll call. Excuse me. Oh, stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Sorry about that.
All right.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Floyd, so kind to call the roll.
Carlos Ray.
Here.
Brian Smith.
Here.
Rudy Barr. Present. Ernie Payne.
Here.
Kristen Costa. Here. Robin Blank.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, sir. This time we'll ask for approval of the minutes. Did everyone have an opportunity to review the minutes?
Yes.
So then move to accept reading of the minutes. Proper second. Minutes are approved. This time, Mr. Floyd, do we have any public comment on agenda items?
No, I don't.
And as we move forward, I failed to mention, for those attending the meeting online, make sure you mute your microphone. We did ask and take requests last week for the public. Mr. Floyd has informed us that we don't have any. And has everyone received the agenda and supporting documents?
Yes.
At this time, Mr. Floyd, we'll take the ethics report.
Okay. With the ethics report, it's been a terribly busy few weeks. It seems like a few weeks since I could have used those extra days that I didn't get in February. But it's been terribly busy, but I would say that it has been quite productive. We have conducted at least 2 training classes for new employees. Well, like in actuality, we'll be doing one tomorrow with the fire department. The chair, Carlos Ray, and I met with the mayor, and that was after the ethics workshop to talk about what was going to happen at the city commission meeting, and you'll get information on that later. But we had discussions. We talked about the lobbying definition, and he made it clear that he was comfortable with the current definition because it lines up with the county and state and blueprint. And he felt that there was case law to support it. We talked about the misuse of position definition. We reiterated why we were making the changes that we're attempting to make, and asked that we not go back to corruptly, and we explained why. So we had a full conversation. We talked about use of disclosure and the fact that the city commission was talking about clarifying it from their vantage point. Right now, there's a scrivener's error, and part of it says it's covering individuals only, and another part says it's everyone, and it's their wish for it to only be covered individuals. And so we talked about that a little bit. We talked about jurisdiction, and I asked some questions just to get a better understanding of who's who. Because since I've been here, I've seen employees who look like city employees, but they also look like they work for CRA, and it's just And it's confusing. I think it's even confusing for city government, for those in leadership. And finally, I asked the question, when will we resolve this? And the response was, we all agree it will probably be when it goes to court. Because we've made it clear that we're going to proceed as is. If there's a case involving CRA, we're going to treat it just like city commission and keep going and sort of have a gentleman's agreement to disagree, and if it comes down to it, let the court decide. So that was kind of how our discussion went. We also talked about training, and what he advised is that I set up a couple of trainings, invite the city commission members, appointees, whoever wants to attend, give them two choices, and then after that, they're on their own. I suggested that we include our board members in that training, so we can be all there together taking the same training and having open discussions. And one thing I appreciated about what he said is that when we train, I will be in charge, not him. And even though, well, that was important. I want it to be an open atmosphere where we can discuss issues and just like I do with employees, and where everybody's respected for their input. We can talk over it. So and we'll talk a little later about board member training. I worked with, Lucy and I worked with Christoph Cage. He is a programmer. He updated the contribution refund program website. We also put the new form that you saw last time. We made it available, and I've made it available to all of the candidates. And I'll be moving forward in a meeting with the public, with the neighborhood association representatives, Women's League, and people I talked to previously to try to move that forward. Our chair, Carlos Ray, spoke to the state attorney's office, Mr. Attorney Campbell, about filling the vacant position. And he did say he was trying. People had the impression that you all work hard and you don't, because I do that. That people had the impression that they would have to work too hard for something that was voluntary, and so he was working against that. A couple of people called me, and I sent them to him. And so he is in the process of vetting them. They both sounded good, and he's in the process of vetting them. So hopefully we'll have some results from that soon. And that's a summary of a little bit, not everything, but a little bit of what we've been up to in the ethics office. And I just want to point out, when you see the agenda on the board docs now, Lucy is doing that herself. It used to be we send it somewhere else and they do it, but now Lucy is doing it herself. And she was happy because she got it right the first time. So, so we do appreciate that. That's the ethics report.
All right. Any comments on the monthly budget report and the monthly complaint report?
Does anyone have any questions about the budget? Not, I'll go to the monthly issue tracking. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 calls. First received on February 9, 2022 from an individual that said that the city attorney refused to place an amendment on the charter for a vote. It came from a 352 number, which would be possibly Duval County. It doesn't necessarily mean it's Duval County, but possibly. Alachua, yeah. Anyway, outside the city of Tallahassee. And they gave me a number, I tried it, and I put it here in case anybody else wants to try it, but it keeps coming up blank, so I haven't been able to respond because I can't get anybody. So I recommend we close that one. Second one was on February 13, 2022. It was both in person and by email from Mr. Stanley Sims. We talked before he sent anything, and so he sent what he sent with my encouragement based on our conversation. We reviewed it and did not find legal sufficiency. We sent a letter to him explaining it to him, and we did have some other recommendations, places he might go to get help with some of his concerns. And I've spoken with him since then, and so I recommend closing this one. The third one we received from Mr. Jared Willis, alleging that City Commissioner Matlow, in his capacity on the blueprint, participated and voted on a blueprint appropriation that constituted a misuse of public position. The argument was that he was a vendor with the FSU program, and that was a conflict of interest. John responded to that and demonstrated why it wasn't an issue. And we finally did legal sufficiency. As far as we can tell, Mr. Willis was not happy with that, but the bottom line is if he has anything else to add to that might change that, we would look at it, but that is our decision. So we're recommending that the board close that. Received a call from the individual concerning a Facebook post by a former city employee. The callers who did not identify herself said that the employee was saying that the city was corrupt and she had information. I was able to find the employee, the person that they were talking about through LinkedIn. I haven't talked to that person yet, but if they have anything to offer, I would consider that a new complaint. There's nothing in this call other than saying somebody said something. So I'm recommending we close this one. As I said, I'm recommending that all four be closed. Any questions?
I just want to state for the record that we received letters, forwarded us letters to Mr. Willis and to Mr. Sims, so that we reviewed that. And, I will move to accept staff recommendations.
Second. All right, properly moved second to accept Mr. Floyd's or ethics officer's recommendations. All in favor?
Aye.
So carries.
That concludes my report.
All right. Well, at this time, we have board recommendations for city commission.
So since we were together last, we've had a workshop with the city commission, and then the city commission had a follow-up meeting. So I think some of you were present and following closely, but I want to give you a quick update. I think it was the first workshop was scheduled for 2 hours. The city commission was kind enough to allow it to extend to 3 hours. We had a very, very positive discussion. I thought it went very well. We discussed 5 things I think that we had all put forward. One was our review of the citizen input, and those issues we thought kind of fell within our wheelhouse and whatnot. The bigger issues were the ordinance changes. We had the recommendations for changes to the lobbyist ordinance, as well as some fixes to the ethics ordinance, and those were treated as two separate under lobbyists. We also proposed an amendment to the charter to give us essentially appellate review if somebody wanted to dispute a penalty assessed by the treasurer clerk's office. That would require an amendment to the charter, so we introduced that for consideration as well. We also discussed the issue of jurisdiction, whether we would have jurisdiction over CRA members and Blueprint members or city commissioners sitting in those capacities. And then we also discussed the issue of whistleblower protection, whether we could be an appropriate local official for purposes of receiving whistleblower complaints and extending whistleblower protections. At the meeting, we on the jurisdictional issue, I think as Mr. Floyd stated, we agreed to disagree. And I think that when the board any complaint comes into us, our first question is always going to be, do we have jurisdiction? And in some cases we will, in some cases we won't. There's probably not a fast and loose rule that says everything with Blueprint is going to be within our jurisdiction, everything with Blueprint is going to be outside jurisdiction. I think it really is going to depend on who the individual is, what the facts of the case are. And we kind of stated to them that that's how we intend to move forward. And as Mr. Floyd mentioned, somebody may decide to seek injunctive relief in the circuit court, and ultimately somebody with a black robe will make the decision for us. But what we did recommend to them is that if it was the city commission's goal that we not include the CRA members, them sitting in their capacity or CRO, or city employees sitting in the CRA, or Blueprint, either as on the board or staff that's hired through the city, that could be carved out in the ordinance, and that would provide us the guidance, so we would know that those people are not within our jurisdiction. So we did put that out there, say, look, we're not really, we had said that we would like to be able to consider this, but we really more than anything want guidance. And that's kind of how we left that. As far as the whistleblower, they did direct us to work with the Inspector General. Inspector General Dennis Sutton is here with us today, as well as Rob Pace in his office. I had an opportunity to meet with them last Friday, and I think we're going to continue to work forward on those issues. And I think our next item is the whistleblower, and Inspector General will be able to send you a little more information on that and how we want to move forward with those things. After the workshop, we then went to a meeting on the 9th. At that point, the city attorney made a number of recommendations, most which were adopted by the city commission. I think all of them, but some were in line with our recommendations, some were not. As far as the misuse of position, I think Floyd mentioned that they had talked about, if you want to put the word corruptly back in, if you remember our long debate on taking corruptly out and putting something in. At the workshop, they said, well, why don't we just put corruptly back in? And we said, well, wait a second, we think the pendulum's swinging too far. We admitted that we swung it too far in one direction. Doesn't mean we need to swing it all the way back in the other direction. We're trying to find that middle spot. And at the end of the day, they did agree with us on that. So the recommendation by the city attorney was to move forward with our recommendation on that. The issue of penalties, where we would be allowed to enter into stipulations, they did agree with that recommendation, and that will be coming forward. The disclosure or use of non-public information, it was hard to understand what was agreed upon at the board. I think we'll have to wait and see what language is put before them. As Mr. Floyd mentioned, there was the way the ordinance is written now, it mentions public officials and city employees, and then later in the language it says covered individuals. So there seems to be a contradiction. So our argument was to take out the covered individual and put public officials and city employees. At the workshop, it appeared that they wanted to actually go in the other direction and make it just covered individuals, not employees or public officials. It does appear that is the direction they are going in, but I'm not quite sure. I think they said, well, we're going to take the recommendations and fix the scriveners there. I think the scriveners will be fixed, so it'll just be covered individuals. And the position by the city attorney was that this is already prohibited under the state ethics code, so we don't need to bring the city employees under our jurisdiction because they're already under the state's jurisdiction. So that's an issue that I think we'll have to watch and see where that goes. The definition of lobbyist, they felt pretty strongly they wanted to stay with the language they had. The city attorney did actually provide some alternative language that they could adopt if they wanted to make a change, but not quite do what we wanted to do. But at the end of the day, they decided just to stick with the existing ordinance as it is now. And I think the primary argument is it creates consistency between the county. Blueprint has its own lobbyist rules and registrations, and the rules are the same with that as well. So why would we want to create confusion for lobbyists that may be working with all those three different groups? So they decided not to move forward with our recommendation on the definition of lobbyist. Lobbyist registration, they felt that that's already done through policy, and what we recommended to put in ordinance wouldn't be necessary, so they did not agree with going forward with that. Lobbyist contingency fees, we wanted to put a ban on contingency fees like the legislature does with their lobbyists, and they did seem agreeable to that, so we'll be moving forward with that recommendation. The public website for lobbyists, we're going to go back more on the lobbyist registration. There's also the contact logs language. They decided not to go forward with the contact logs language. Going back to the public website for lobbyist registration and compensation reports, that also, like the registration issue, is dealt through policy through the Treasurer Clerk's office. They felt that it was redundant and not required for ordinance, and they decided to be best held by policy. And then the issue of the expanded jurisdiction of our board over lobbyists for appellate review, they felt that was not necessary. There is judicial review. If somebody disagrees with the penalty, they could go straight to circuit court. They felt that was satisfactory and that there was no reason for us to be involved in that matter. So that is the decisions that were made by the city commission. I don't know exactly when they'll be bringing this back up, but they'll have to, I guess, have two readings and adopt the ordinances. So as those come forward, we will let you know. So the big issue, I think, right now, this is kind of in our hands. The issue that I think is still kind of within our hands is the issue of whistleblower, whether we're going to do it, whether we're not going to do it, when, all that. And I think that'll be best handled by Mr. Sutton. He's here today to kind of share with you some of his thoughts, some of his concerns, and maybe how we can move forward. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Any questions, Mr. Spain?
I also wanted to make everybody aware of something else that happened at the end of the city commission meeting that you may not be aware of. After the entire agenda had gone through at the sharing of ideas section, Commissioner Matlow wanted to do something to alleviate the length of time between when we give them recommendations and when they respond. So he initially made a motion to put a 60-day limit for them to respond to our recommendations. City attorney pushed back a bit, saying that she couldn't promise 60 days without knowing what the issue might be. So Matlow asked for a substitute motion so that when recommendations are received by the ethics office, from the ethics office, they would invite the ethics officer within 60 days to give a formal presentation before the city commission, at which point I believe the city attorney would be assigned the task to respond. So and that motion was approved unanimously. So we're looking for them to when next week give recommendations.
Do we have any more questions from board members to Mr. Reed? All right, thank you so much for that. We'll move on to section 8. Mr. Floyd?
Yeah, whistleblower, when we were at the workshop, I think we pretty much made it clear that we were already communicating with the Attorney General's office, and I think from his position and ours, if anything was going to happen, it really required that we communicate and bring something back to the city commission. We met and we talked, and then they met, and we thought that a good next step would be for Inspector Sutton to come in and share what he knows, what we don't know, what we can learn about whistleblower, what it is and how it works, what it would mean to us. You know, those I believe Attorney Blankus, asked that question, what, so that we don't have the wrong expectations out of what might happen if we were to adopt this. So, he's gonna share, give us all of that and, give his unadulterated opinion. He's a very brave man and, he's very forthright, which I appreciate. So, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Thank you all for having me. First, I want this to kind of be a discussion. If you all have any questions, jump right in. We can address it instead of circling back to it. It might make it feel a little bit smoother. Up front, I want to say that I do support the idea of the ethics board having whistleblower authority with a caveat. And I'll just go ahead and put that out there now. As a concern of mine is overlapping jurisdiction. If there's jurisdiction in over the same individual and file a complaint in two places, concurrent investigations can be problematic. So I really want to try and avoid that with any recommendation that I would support. With that being said, I want to try and give a little bit of background on, I think it's a bad idea for reasons that I'll get into later that the board have whistleblower authority, but I will support it. So I kind of want to make upfront and clear where I stand. And then hopefully by my discussion, you'll understand why I have that conclusion. But first, I want to give you all a little bit of background on what whistleblower is and kind of my editorial thoughts on the whistleblower statute that we have in the state of Florida. First of all, whistleblower protection is widely misunderstood by people. That the general public and even some people in the IG community kind of have an understanding or a thought that whistleblower is some kind of armor that protects any complainant. Really, whistleblower is reactive. It is not proactive. So one of the main thrusts of whistleblower is that an adverse action has to be taken against a complainant before whistleblower protections can kick in. That's something that most people don't understand. And as far as the statute goes, and I think John will support me on this, it's a mess. It's hard to understand. That it jumps back and forth between requirements for state agencies, for local government agencies. It jumps between protections of information, protections of individuals. It's all over the place, and it takes a lot to get through it.
Dennis,
Yeah.
when you say, could you give us an example when you say adverse action?
So an adverse action is an employee is demoted, fired, not allowed to have overtime, if that's a custom. So something negative has to be done to the employee that is complained before whistleblower complaints could even be considered. And there's a lot more before we even get to that point. So one of the things that I wanted to point out is that just recently, and I'm not going to name any names, there's been an individual that went to the media and claimed that they were a whistleblower. And I'm just going to kind of go through and point out some things about that. I'm sure most of you know what I'm referring to, but I want to kind of use that as an example of the basic misunderstanding of what whistleblower is. The whistleblower statute provides. So the individual went out to the media and claimed that one of their supervisors, one of their bosses, had created a hostile work environment, and it was, I want to make sure I get the wording right here, textbook harassment is what was claimed. If you look at the whistleblower statute, neither one of those areas is covered by whistleblower protections. Those aren't violations that would entitle somebody to whistleblower protection. But on top of that, no adverse action had been taken against the person. As far as I know, that person had not filed a signed and written complaint with anybody with the authority to grant whistleblower protections. The concept of even if that person was a whistleblower, announcing it to the media then violates the whistleblower protection statute. And so it's a mess. But what bothers me there is that nobody called out all the shortcomings with that assertion that it was a whistleblower complaint So that just furthers the misunderstanding of whistleblower in the public. It makes it that much more, I don't want to say unfair, but detrimental to people that feel like they have protections that they don't really have. So that's kind of just some editorial thoughts on whistleblower. One of the things next I want to go into is what actually is in the statute for whistleblower protections. That there are really two areas where whistleblower protection is. If a person complains or reports a violation of, and I want to get the language right here, violation or suspected violation of any federal, state, local law, rule, regulation committed by an employee or agent or agency or independent contractor, which creates and presents a substantial and specific danger to the public's health, safety, or welfare. So that's the first area that would be covered. Now, what that means is that not every violation of law reporting entitles somebody to whistleblower protection. It's a two-part. It has to not only be a violation of law, it also has to create a substantial danger to the public's health, safety, or welfare. So it's in the statute, it sets a very high bar for what types of complaints would enable or entitle someone to whistleblower protection. The second area where whistleblower protections are extended are for any act or suspected act of gross mismanagement, malfeasance, misfeasance, gross waste of public funds, suspected or actual Medicaid fraud or abuse, gross neglect of duty committed by an employer or agency or independent contractor. So even there, if you look at those individual line items, that also sets a high bar. It's not just mismanagement, it has to be gross mismanagement, not waste of public funds, it has to be a gross waste of public funds. So it really sets a high bar. And referring back to what I said, the public has this perception that if they file a complaint about anything, they can automatically be a whistleblower. And that's just not the case. It's a high bar to get there for whistleblower. Most of the time when you hear court cases relating to whistleblower, it's after somebody gets fired, they claim that they were a whistleblower because they filed a complaint or they said pointed out something that was wrong. But that individual really had to have gone through a lot of steps to get that whistleblower status. First, the thing they had to complain about had to meet that high bar to enable them to receive whistleblower threshold. But then there's timelines that are laid out in the statute as to how quickly they need to take action. And it has to be within 60 days of the adverse action. The person has to make the complaint seeking whistleblower protection. Now, they've had to make that complaint about the action prior to that. And then within 180 days, the entire matter needs to be resolved by statute. One of the things that I mentioned about the confusion in the state statute is that when it comes to state agencies, there's a very detailed, prescriptive bunch of timelines and time gates that have to be met by the agency investigating and reviewing the complaint. For local government, there isn't anything about those timelines. And so it's up to the local government to set those things in place. Now, that 180-day deadline is still in place. There's no way around that. What we've done in the Inspector General's office to make sure that we move things properly is we've just adopted what the requirement for state agencies are as far as those different timelines. So for example, one of the requirements is that within 20 days of the complaint being received, a determination has to be made if that individual qualifies for whistleblower status. As far as it goes for this board, if the board is designated as the appropriate local official, the board would have to hold a special meeting within 20 days of that determination, of that complaint, to make the determination as to whether they qualify for whistleblower protection. I've got Rob Pace here to get into more detail if you all want about all those different timelines, because he created a whole flow chart of different start and stop and parallel timelines. It's a lot to keep track of. So that kind of gives you an idea of the basic process for whistleblower. Some other things that are important is that to be an appropriate local official, the official must have the ability to investigate, police, manage, or otherwise remedy violation. So comes from this board, it has to be something within your jurisdiction that would enable you to provide or grant whistleblower status to that person. When I look at the list of violations that I laid out earlier, and then what's in the ethics code, where is there an overlap? And where I see an overlap is in the misuse of position. So for misuse of position, it rises to the level of misfeasance. That is where this board would have the ability to grant whistleblower protection for a complainant. So to take that to the next level, I had to go look this up because I'm not an attorney, but misfeasance is the wrongful exercise of a lawful authority. And then the misuse of position, based on what the commission has just accepted and hasn't come back for ordinance change yet, but it will. So the misuse of position is an action inconsistent with the proper performance of office that results in a special benefit or exemption. So to lay those on top of each other, for a complaint received by the ethics board to be eligible for whistleblower protection, one, the violation had to be something that was legal. The misfeasance is illegal, is a wrongful exercise of lawful authority. It had to be something that was in that person's jurisdiction or within their authority. So they had to have the authority to do what they did. And it has to be inconsistent with the proper performance of their job. And finally, results in a special benefit or exemption. So if the complaint meets all of those criteria, it's potentially eligible for whistleblower status. Now the question is, and this is where judgment comes in, is does it rise to a high enough level that would reasonably be considered a whistleblower complaint? I spoke with John Kerry, not that John Kerry, the John Kerry that's the Inspector General from Palm Beach County. In Palm Beach County, they have an ethics board that has whistleblower authority, and then his office that also has whistleblower authority. They have never had a complaint in the Palm Beach County Ethics Commission that rose to the level of whistleblower. And if you all follow what happens in Palm Beach, they're a lot more active and have a lot more issues that come before them in Palm Beach than we do here. Not that we're perfect, I'm not saying that, but Palm Beach is a whole nother beast than we are.
Large.
Yeah, and their Inspector General is completely different than we are here too, with my office. The Inspector General in Palm Beach County has jurisdiction over every part of municipal government in the county. So every city, county commission, water district, school board, we extend to our equivalent of Blueprint, CRA, CDA, CRTPA, they have jurisdiction over everything. And the ethics board still has not had any complaints that rose to that level that would be considered worthy of whistleblower protection. So it's not something that I think would come up before you all every day. I think it would be a very, very rare, if ever, occurrence for it to happen. Not to say that it couldn't. I already talked about the time requirements and the state agencies having a much more detailed timeline laid out in statute for them to follow. Now, some areas where I think the board could have some concerns with having whistleblower authority, or where I see some, and I already mentioned the idea of overlapping jurisdiction and parallel investigations. When it comes to whistleblower, you can't talk amongst each other. Two different agencies, two different departments, sections, whatever. So we wouldn't be able to really talk about the complaint. And if we were to come up with two different endings to these complaints, it could be problematic. Where another place where it could be problematic is, and I'm sure you all have seen this in you all's work, is multifaceted complaints, where somebody comes in complaining and they 3, 4 different things that they've alleged at the same time. One of them may be within the jurisdiction of the ethics board. Everything else may be within the jurisdiction of the inspector general. How do you parse and split one, bifurcated complaint? Problematic again. There's more problems that come from this type of an issue. And then one last issue that you all probably want to keep a thought of is that if you all have whistleblower authority and somebody claims that they were a whistleblower, you all may get subpoenaed individually to testify when the courts are trying to determine whether that person satisfied all the requirements to be a whistleblower. So did they file the complaint with you all like they should have in the timely manner? What did you all do to make that determination? Did you all even consider it for whistleblower protection? All those things may come up when that person's complaint is reviewed by the courts. And oftentimes people will just go straight to the court and not come through the administrative process that they're required to. But it may put you all in the position where you're receiving subpoenas to be deposed in those areas. So that's kind of my thoughts here on whistleblower. Like I said at the beginning, I support you all having it, but there's lots of problems that could come up. And my idea on the jurisdiction is that I don't have jurisdiction over the Inspector General's office. I'm not independent. It wouldn't make any sense to receive a complaint about myself or my office or the City Commission. I'm not independent of the City Commission. If there's complaints about the City Commission, I either go ahead and refer it to Dwight as it is, or I refer it to some other place in the city to be addressed. My office does not handle any complaints dealing with commissioners or commission staff. So if there's a complaint about staff, we refer that wherever the appropriate part of the city is for handling those types of complaints. And with that, I'm here to help and answer any questions you all might have.
I'll start off. I got a little confused on one part. You stated that an adverse action had to take place prior to.
It was prior to any remedies from the whistleblower statute.
Oh, okay. All right.
What's that statute?
If it's,
It is 112. 3187 through 112, 895. First one, the 3187 kind of lays out the violations. 3188 talks about the confidentiality of the records. 3189 is the area that lays out the detailed timelines and process for state agencies conducting their investigations. It does not apply to local governments. And then 3195 is the investigative procedures in response to prohibited personnel actions. So that's the sections of the statute.
no, it's on you.
We had a situation where someone came in, perhaps to you, and said, I have been subjected to adverse action. The adverse action took place within the past 60 days. I believe that it was tied to written some complaint that I made that alleged gross mismanagement in the space of malfeasance or created a health safety welfare danger for the public. The person who did it is a commissioner or member of commission staff. What does your office do?
Refer to Dwight.
At which point it loses the position of a whistleblower?
I can't provide whistleblower protection related to commission actions. The alternative would be to go to the city manager. The way the statute reads is that the appropriate local authority is the chief executive officer or appropriate local designated local official. But really, that would be a hole where we stand right now with whistleblower protection in the city.
The timeframe you talked about, that, as LaPointe said, that starts at the point of the adverse action, all right, not at the time of the complaint.
60 days from the adverse action.
Have you had any,
I have not had a complaint
if,
that rose to that level.
have you given thought to, when you get a complaint that you see may come to that point, would you notify the complainant to let them know what the parameters are? Or are they in the dark until such point as the claim was?
We would reach out to get additional information about the complaint to see if it does rise to that level. Now, just to be clear, a person under section 3188 can have confidentiality of their identity without being a whistleblower. There's a difference. There's confidentiality. Now, the violations laid out in 3188, I think, mirror exactly what's laid out in 3187. So if a person comes to my office and alleges something that's a violation of law, that's creates a health, safety, welfare, risk mismanagement, and so on, we can keep their identity confidential forever. If there's no adverse action ever taken against them, the other provisions of the whistleblower statute don't kick in, but their identity is still held confidential.
The confidentiality is at the time they claim whistleblower protection?
You make a determination at that time.
It's not at the time of the complaint. So before then,
Make the complaint, we have, based on hours, correct me here, it was 15 days to review the complaint and determine if it meets the requirements in 3188.
at that point,
Their identity would be kept confidential.
it,
I mean, like, for an investigation, it would be anyway, but that would then be kept confidential forever.
in the case of Palm Beach, where they have this overlapping jurisdiction you're talking about, have you talked to them about how they deal with that? In terms of if one office, the Inspector General's office gets a complaint and the Ethics Office gets a complaint from the same person, is there communication with them between them?
They've never had an instance, but talking with him, he indicated that he would not take the complaint. He would allow it to be handled by, if he was aware that the complaint was in the other place as well, he would handle it.
But if he is aware.
Right.
So it seems like it would be appropriate if that would be something up front to respond to a complainant, to ask if they were complaining to the other
Part of our
party.
process.
Yeah, and if it is part of the process already.
It's part of our process.
We don't have a process.
So if it were to become part of our process, then you could notify the complainant up front, and basically between you decide which office would handle it.
I wouldn't reach out. It would impact my decision as to whether we open an investigation or not. If I find out that person tells me they've complained to the State Ethics Commission, they've complained to the Ethics Office, they've complained to XYZ agency, all that is going to be part of my decision-making process as to whether I open an investigation or not.
So if they don't tell you that there's also,
If they lie when we ask that question,
you do ask the question.
we ask the question, and then the answer factors into our decision-making process. And they're under oath when they're asked that question.
It seems to me that the primary value of whistleblower protection is deterrence. of making sure that complaints are valid and they're treated seriously, and that a person feels safe from adverse actions if they were to proceed with a complaint. So it would involve a lot of.
There is no protection from adverse action. It's reactive
Yeah.
to an adverse action.
But the complainant needs to be aware of those things in order for the system to work well. So I would think would require a lot of communication with the complainant. If you see the issue could rise to that level, if the person is complaining about an action by their supervisor.
One thing that I need to make clear is that when a person files a complaint, the substance of the complaint does become public at the end, even if it was whistleblower. And based on the substance of a complaint, it's typically not very hard to go back and figure out who it was, even if their identity is held confidential. If you look, you all know, you can figure it out based on the information that's in the complaint. Even though you do everything you can, take out pronouns, take out position, anything you can do to take out any identifiable information, just the substance of it, you can narrow it down to a very small circle. And typically, there's only one person there that's been unhappy, and you kind of know who it is. That's the complaint.
So how does that affect your actions?
It doesn't impact it at all. I'm just talking from a practical standpoint. In the real world, that's the way it works. And, you know, whistleblowers, they have a tough row to hoe once they file their complaint. And if somebody suspects that it's them, you know, they may be ostracized by fellow employees. There's all kinds of things that aren't covered by the whistleblower statute that in the real world happen to whistleblowers. It takes a lot of courage to come forward with a complaint that rises to the level of whistleblower. And I would never discourage anybody to file a complaint, but there's realities to it.
Is there any notification on the website or something about all of these rules that require it?
It's in state statute, and when somebody comes to us, we discuss it through with them if we think the complaint may go in that direction.
All of these things that you do, I think that Mr. Floyd could also, in terms of advising them. And I think that we should take seriously the holes that you mentioned. You don't have jurisdiction over the city commission.
And that's where I would support the ethics board having whistleblower for my office and for the city commission. I wouldn't support it, and I don't think that the commission would support. I can't speak for them, obviously, but I don't believe that they would support jurisdiction over the entire organization because of the overlap and the problems that can cause.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
originally when we drafted the language, we actually had that as an alternative. I just didn't want to give it up right away. So it was a consideration in our discussion.
Anyone else with any questions? Any comments?
You have anything?
Okay. I guess if I'm expecting.
If I could, just one more time. He did a very good job in his write-up of whistleblower protections that he sent to you all. One thing that I kind of wanted to expand on a little bit is where the Attorney General had made the comment that it's legal, but it wasn't advised, I think is the language that they used in their opinion. I would go further. For a body instead of an individual to have whistleblower, it's legal, but it's a bad idea. The Attorney General doesn't advise it. I think it's a bad idea, but it's not illegal. Just all these problems that I talked about, individual board members being subpoenaed, having to call an emergency meeting to discuss and designate whistleblower protections, and making sure that you have a quorum to get here within the 20 days in the state statute. We've made it 15, so we've made it more stringent on ourselves. We have to move faster. There's multiple reasons that the Attorney General doesn't recommend it. But I think your counsel did a great job of laying that out for you in his communication. Sorry for jumping in there.
I'll take compliments. If I could just weigh in, I think one of the issues that I think I raised 2 years ago when we first started discussing it was the confidentiality and the penalties associated with it. It's a first-degree misdemeanor. Under whistleblower, we don't have those types of limits. So it is something you want to tread carefully on. I think that there are ways that we could do it for areas that are outside the jurisdiction of the Inspector General's office. It might be the easy fix to compromise so we're not stepping on each other's feet. I think that might be a good alternative because I do think it could create some confusion, and then we'd have to look into whether we are even able to communicate. You say no, I'm not sure. I'd like to go look some more whether, depending on how the ordinance is written, whether we can have some type of consultation and investigation. I think one of the bigger issues, and I think I discussed this in one of our previous meetings, is this weird case out of Miami where the person just went to a city commission meeting and blurted out something, and then when they tried to get the case dismissed because they didn't meet the conditions proceeding to bring a claim because they didn't exhaust their administrative remedies, the court said, well, no, they went to a board that had the authority to investigate it, and they just didn't do anything. That's on them. So they got the whistleblower protection at that point, and they were able to bring the claim in circuit court. And I think that's another issue we have is I think one of the issues is you want to try to handle things internally. And I think that's one of the reasons for the adverse action. If you're having trouble in your office, first thing you shouldn't do is pick up, call the IG, the ethics office. You try to fix it in your office and try to resolve it that way. But if your hours get cut or all of a sudden you're moved into a room closet, I actually had a client who actually was moved into a closet when he made a complaint, then you have that adverse action a step further. So I think that the Inspector General makes very good points, and I think it is an issue that this is very complicated issue. And the ordinance, not the ordinance, the statute is very important. We do agree. I know the woman who actually created the office in Palm Beach, I actually consulted her when I produced my first memo, I think, on this issue. And she even said, yeah, we have one of the worst statutes. So she works for the United Nations, and she sees everything. And she says, yeah, Florida's really, really good. So that creates another area of confusion because now we're dealing, we don't have the roadmap that we would like to have in some ways. So.
Is that something you could maybe coordinate, Mr. Floyd, again for us to hash this out a little bit more?
You say coordinate.
I guess you all have been meeting offline and outside of the meeting.
Yeah, I think at this point, it's probably more a thing of John and I looking at it in figuring out, because a lot of this is administrative, figuring out how it can work. For example, if there's a whistleblower, if there's a true whistleblower complaint, not notifying you all, just working within this circle. So it remains confidential. You don't get involved until it necessitates, but otherwise, just talking about things like how it can work, going through the statute, and maybe bringing that back to see.
Yes.
Thank you. I think that might be, it's a question that can be answered is the determination of whistleblower status with employees. Is that not eligible to be whistleblower jurisdiction?
That would be on the board.
So we could say, well, we could give that to Mr. Floyd, and then field ourselves.
Well, that's actually something we were talking about.
I don't believe that you delegate.
And
The Inspector General position has been designated as the appropriate local official for the city. I could not then delegate it to my chief of investigations to make that determination. He can review it and then come back and advise me, and I make the call. And that's one of the problems with it being a board rather than an individual.
And I do agree with if we had to bring you guys in every 3 days because we're getting new complaints, then we really wouldn't get another name from the state attorney's office, because that would be a lot of work. I think we did talk about what can we delegate, what can we not delegate. I did look at Palm Beach. Palm Beach's charter creates an ethics office, does not create an ethics officer or an executive director. I think they call it an executive director down there. You create an ethics officer and an ethics office. Whistleblower statute, the whistleblower ordinance in Palm Beach County it says that it says the ethics office and staff are an appropriate local official. Yeah, it says the Commission on Ethics, they call them the Commission on Ethics, and its staff shall be considered, quote, an appropriate local official, unquote, for the purpose of whistleblower protection provided for in Florida Statute 112.3188 sub 1. So now the question is if it just runs through staff to get to the board, that's just as a conduit, that's one thing. But if the staff has actual power, that's another thing. That's something I would probably want to talk to their office to find out exactly. Can your executive director, without bringing the board together and getting a decision, say, yep, that person's whistleblower? They get the protection or not? And that's a question I don't have an answer to.
And I don't think that would be a legally binding decision because they've never had a whistleblower. I mean, it would just be their judgment
Oh yeah, no.
as to whether it would ultimately, I think that would be the court's to decide if somebody challenged your ability to delegate.
Yeah, I know that the third DCA case did say that as far as the conditions proceeding to get into circuit court, is to be read as liberal as possible to grant as much protection to the complainant as possible. So as far as what we're allowed to do internally, from a bureaucratic standpoint, that's one thing. But as far as what they need to do in order to get that go to court card, it allows them to just go straight and file lawsuits. It's a whole other thing too. And that's another issue. Is once we may be an appropriate local official for that purpose only. Anyways, just because of the power given to this board through the charter, but we wouldn't have the authority to do all the investigations and declare somebody a whistleblower that's codified in the ordinance. So, as I said, it's a mess. So,
Do you have something, Mr. Swain?
Yeah, you do not have authority over the city commission. You have authority over the other appointed officials? Yes, you do. If there was a complaint against the city manager or one of his subordinates that led to adverse reactions, and that the supervisor said that they were pressured by the city commission, how would that work in terms of jurisdiction?
There would be a whole different set of problems because the city commission isn't allowed to reach beyond the appointed officials.
Yes.
So then that would open up a whole other can of worms.
And is that a legal can of worms that we would not have authority over anyway, or is
And I'm not 100% sure on this, so I probably shouldn't even speak. But Mr. Floyd said sometimes I go further than I should. I believe that that's grounds for removal from office. And so that would take it to a whole nother level for a commissioner to pressure a staff below one of the appointed officials.
And I just asked John, next step, and would probably be to continue work with this office. I want that diagram that he talked about.
Oh, I thought you did it already.
For free. But it would be for us to, because we need to bring some back, bring some solutions back. And So we need to do some work, communicate some more. I think probably if we need, what I recommend is that you agree to the, to whistleblower protection for the Inspector General's office, City Commission, and that would be their staff too. And the City Commission staff, so that there is.
For complaints against commission, staff, IG staff.
Right, because that whole dual thing, is, we're not gonna stop that. And it is being addressed. So, it would be almost like questioning their integrity to say, we need to do it too. But if, where there is a gap, we fill that gap. That's what I'm recommending, that we fill that gap. And so if you approve that, then agree to that, then we can move forward from that perspective.
Yes, sir.
Another recommendation I would have, kind of as I was listening, we may want to revise our complaint form to include a box saying have the allegations made in this complaint also been filed with the Inspector General's office. Because there may be an issue where we're going to do the City Commission IG and underlying staff, and they get everybody else. There may be issues where we can defer like we do with the State Attorney's Office, the State Commission on Ethics. We may want to include those boxes as well, so we know exactly. We've never had to deal with that before, but maybe we do want to have someone, they sign it under oath. They say we are, we got these same issues before another body, and we may decide, okay, well, that's something we need to defer to them on, or that's something that's more in our wheelhouse and they defer to us. That might be something we want to look at doing further. And I could bring that back to the next meeting.
That's where I really think the idea of these multifaceted complaints is where it gets it gets messy, when there's, say, a complaint against a commissioner and an appointed official at the same time. It can get messy at that point. But I think that we could come up with some kind of resolution for that. If I saw a complaint that dealt with an elected official, I would immediately be referring it to the ethics office. Even if I knew it was something that was outside of y'all's jurisdiction, I would still refer it here if I didn't have a better place to refer it to.
I appreciate you bringing that to the attention of the City Commission, also the holes that you mentioned, that you don't have jurisdiction over the City Commission. Did have one other thing, taking advantage of your being here, I want to bring up something entirely different, in case you wanted to go on to other things. Last summer, you presented a report on the ethics in the city. And, there were action items that had a deadline of December 31st. And you mentioned at that point when you presented to us that you could have a report to that effect by around March.
We follow up once a year on action plan steps that were due in the preceding year. So on March 31st, we will send out a request for the status of all the action plan steps that were due from April 1st of last year to March 31st of this year, and that will be included in this. So sometime after that, we will conduct our evaluation on the status of those steps. I can say that I know that several of them have been completed, because I was in the room when it happened.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Not to quote Hamilton.
Hamilton, yeah. I got it.
Well, all right, I guess that brings this discussion to conclusion.
I just want to say thank you.
You're welcome, and if you need me, if you'd like me to come back and discuss it further or be here, myself as a subject matter expert, to provide whatever advice I can to you all moving forward in this area, please don't hesitate.
All right, thank you again.
And,
So that takes us to agenda item 9. Chairman Ray, you ready?
Good night, buddy.
Good one.
What'd you
Board,
say?
remember what number 9 is again? Is this the training?
Yes, sir.
Yes, okay. I think what came out of workshop was an issue about whether or not we are required to do training. I mentioned in the workshop that we are going to do it one way or the other, but I thought in good faith, we could put it on our bylaws that we at least self-acknowledge once a year of going through our own training. So something to consider, some bylaw to that effect.
I don't know what he said.
Can you
All
hear
right,
me?
Yeah, we
hear
heard you. It was almost an echo. What you were, I believe you, correct me if I'm wrong, you were saying that at the workshop, there was mention, about the board's training.
Yeah.
And you were following up on that.
Yes. Can you hear me? Is there an echo still?
I can understand you better.
Okay. Let me try slowly here now. So I believe we should put in our bylaws a requirement that at least once a year, we self-acknowledge completing our own training or some kind of ethics training as a board.
Good idea.
Okay.
All right. That's not from the board. I'm not here from the board.
All right. We can do that.
Sure.
yes, sir.
Just in my mind, I think your idea of us attending training with the city commissioners would be a good idea, just to see, not only for our own benefit of getting the training, but to see what they're getting as well. So,
And to try to get us on the same page in understanding the standards and how they're applied.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it.
That takes us to Mr. Floyd, agenda item 10.
Okay, and I've really already talked about it with the website update and different form. And my next step is to go, and I've gotten it to the city officials. I'm going to work with the programmer to create an online form. I think maybe a way for them to attach items online and send it online and do everything online that people have suggested. So I'll be working on that over the next 30 days. And I will be setting up a meeting with legal women's voters representatives, neighborhood associations, and Mr. Payne will help me with that. So that's where we go next.
Thank you so much. Mr. Reed will, there's the advisory opinion that we have.
Yes, we received a request for an advisory opinion from the procurement manager from the City of Tallahassee. They have conflict of interest forms that they have city vendors complete in their office, and she wanted to know whether we must or should require that they identify campaign contributions that they make to members of the city commission. So I do go into, this use of position is, kind of falls under conflict of interest. So I think that's kind of how we get there. And essentially I put in here a couple of things. One, I do put a lot in here about the First Amendment right to contribution to a campaign and how that right should be protected. And I do say that based on the ethics code, there's nothing that requires this. We don't have any jurisdiction over the vendors regardless, so we wouldn't be able to do that anymore. Whether it should be, I said that's a policy decision, which falls solely within the authority of the city commission to make those types of decisions, so I didn't offer an opinion on that. But that was really what it all came down to, was does the ethics code require them to put that question on the questionnaire? And I said that it did not.
Any comments or questions concerning this advisory opinion? Further discussion?
Just a comment that I think it's already been dealt with, but the vendors are required to register on the city website as vendors. As long as that's been being kept up to date, the citizens can see who's a vendor. They can also see who is a contributor at the supervisor of elections sites. So I would think that would be sufficient.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So we need approval.
Move to adopt.
There's a motion to approve to adopt. Supervisor opinion?
I would move to approve.
Second. Move in second. All in favor?
Number 12 is media relations, and again, that's going to be the chair, correct? Media relations policy.
We'll try this again. If it doesn't come clear, Mr. Floyd knows my position. We are entering a pretty interesting election season this year. I think it'll be advised that board members refrain from engaging the media conversation, engaging media at all. One recommendation I have is adopting a policy that any issues with media will be handled by the chair, and members of the board should refrain from discussing anything before the board with the media. That will be a policy recommendation to put in our bylaws. Another recommendation I have as well, doesn't deal with media, but deals with politics, is that board members try the best to refrain from engaging in politics or being seen supporting any candidate or speaking on behalf of any candidate during election season, especially for city offices. Won't be a policy, but there's a recommendation from myself that we as board members refrain from in any way seeming supporting any city candidate during the election. But the other one would be a policy recommendation that media relations will be dealt by the chair.
I would like to just add a simple, or the chair's designee.
Right.
In case you can't speak, or maybe, of or an issue that someone else may be very equipped to speak on, or even the board attorney. So I would say the chair's designee.
Okay.
Ms. Payne?
In general, I would support this, but I want to be sure that we have the terms defined as far as media goes, who is specifically is included in that. One of the concerns that I have personally is I sit on the local government committee of the League of Women Voters, and I regularly give reports on the activities of this board as well as of the city commission. And if this is a policy, I don't want to step on toes. I want to clarify whether that would be allowed, since I'm not giving a report to the press for that, but it is for public consumption. Would that be a conflict?
I'll have to think about that one. I can discuss that with the council and Floyd.
I would have some concern with it because we're all board members, and so if we're saying something, it seems as if we're representing the board. And even though it may be a commissioner, I think do they have media representatives that accompany or work for the city or the commission?
But they have communications department.
All right, and they're technically considered media. And to me, the lines can get blurred that way because we're recognized as being independent ethics board members. So when we're speaking or reporting out, how do we really contain that we don't start coming off as advocates or expressing our own opinions, which we may when we're human. We're citizens and we're concerned about what's going on in the community as well. So how do we prevent that? And to me, the best way to prevent that is just to defer everything to the chair or the chair designee as it relates to the ethics board. But that's just my opinion.
To be clear, when I'm reporting on the city commission, I'm reporting on what's public record already. video is posted on the website, as is our video.
You have anything else, Mr. Ray?
Now, can we have a vote on the motion to have the council draft a policy on this?
Oh, yeah, I guess today you can make the motion.
Yep.
All right.
I'll make a motion.
All right. We have a second from Ms. Blank, excuse me. And so, all in favor? Oh, we have a question.
Well, now, is it the, as written here, as agenda item 12, or is it with the included language, or the recommended language for designee or board attorney?
So whatever was just to get the conversation started. So
Oh.
I'm going by what you said.
All right, so,
So, Mr. Ray, does that include, does your motion include the chair's designee or board attorney?
Yeah, I like that. That works. That works.
Talk about Mr. Reed bringing a report back to us to vote on. Is that correct?
Oh, we were,
Yeah.
was that,
Like some proposed language
right.
for the next meeting.
So I guess I'll take it back to the vote.
I'm in favor.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Motion passes. So with that, we will now move to Mr. Floyd, public comment on non-agenda items.
Yes, and I have Mr. Wilcox.
Well, I just wanted to thank the board and the staff for all your hard work on the lobbying ordinances that came before the city commission. I was extremely disappointed in the commission for not moving to close that lobby registration loophole that we all talked about. And I think we're going to continue to see unregistered lobbying activity here in the city of Tallahassee, which is unfortunate. But you've done basically all you could do at this point, and I think the issue is going to come back at some point. But thank you again for all your hard work.
Thank you. Mr. Stanley Sims.
Stanley Sims, 1320 Avondale Way. I want to echo Mr. Wilcox too. You guys fought a good fight. I even saw Mr. Wilcox get a little excited there. I thought that was me and the white form that standing up there at the podium. But there is another issue that I would like for Attorney Reed for you all to consider, and that is the no trespassing warrant. Currently, right now, if you get a no trespassing warrant at a park, you have a remedy for appeal. You go to the planning department, you state your case, they can either overturn that decision or leave it the same. Currently, you can get a no trespassing warrant, lock you out of City Hall, and there is no remedy. So whoever gives you that no trespassing warrant in City Hall is your judge, jury, and prosecutor with no remedy for a year. And so if we're looking at different things, in City Hall, there's a lot of mitigation there. If we have a remedy for to let a person on a park, we should have a remedy for a person to come in City Hall to have access to their local government. And so I'm asking the board, as you look, I think that the independent office, once a person is given a no trespassing warrant and they want to appeal that, and if it's not you all, then an appeal process should be when someone takes the right of an individual to come hear their local government. I just view that has very serious concerns with no remedy. None, zero. So you can go to the park and act inappropriately or allegedly act inappropriately and go and state your case. But you can get thrown out of City Hall for a whole year, have no access to your government, and cannot come to your local government meetings can't speak. That's a red flag. It's not even as problematic as adding an ordinance for whistleblower. It's just a matter of you taking on this action. I believe when the citizens of Tallahassee asked for an independent ethics office, they wanted people like them. They went to their Publix, their gas stations, so that when they had problems, such as these minute problems, getting answers, they could come to you for a remedy. This is something that needs a remedy. This is access to City Hall. This is an independent ethics issue that deals with the people. We have a remedy for our parks. Why we don't have a remedy for our local? And I want to thank Mr. Floyd, Ms. Ruby. He sent me a beautiful letter. When I read a letter of denial, Ms. Blake, it was not an acceptance. But that letter showed sensitivity, direction, and respect for my feelings. Even though it said no. And I did tell Mr. Floyd this personally, and I also wanted to come back, Mr. Reed, and say this publicly. He told me you helped write the letter too, because I chewed them out about the last letter they sent me. And so, and I also want to say too is, when Mr. Thing was saying about we don't properly educate, I wasn't properly educated. I came to you all first from the beginning. I thought you was the guy supposed to fix everything. And so there is that education component of what your constraints are. And so I want to just thank you guys for being patient with me. And please look into something of a remedy of a no trespassing for individuals.
Thank you, Mr. Sims.
Mr. Racine?
Sorry, Peter Batzine. I didn't fill out a card, but I wanted to add a bit to what Ben said. Obviously, we're very disappointed about what happened, particularly with the lobby disclosure issue. You all spent over 2 years on that issue. And, I've, for one, just when I watched that debacle, I was most concerned. It now is going to obviously go to the political level. We've got upcoming elections. Neither you nor us as a coalition can engage in supporting or opposing specific candidates. But I wanted you to know that we will be meeting with the candidates and we will be specifically asking them for their positions on these issues that have come before the City Commission, including the lobby disclosure and registration reforms that you worked on and that we worked on for so many years. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't fill out a card. My name's Margaret Moore, 1910 Monticello Drive. I just had a couple questions about when Mayor Daley had brought up the issue of a complaint had been filed against him at the CRA level last year, and the city resolved it, the ethics board resolved it, and the complaint was dismissed. I'm just wondering if there's any remedy for any expenses or costs, since, technically, I guess the ethics board wasn't to review that CRA complaint, or maybe I'm mistaken, but I'm just wondering, if, and then I had also, and I'm also curious about the abuse of the ethics report system, false allegations, city money being used to defend people who have been found to be not in, I don't know all the technical terms, I'm sorry.
Dated.
Well, I'm just wondering, if a complaint like that is lodged and the city ends up paying for it, and that means that the citizens and the taxpayers are ending up paying for it, what is the recourse or the remedy for allegations that do not even meet level, but they're getting paid for? And it seems like they're being abused. I've recently seen other reports and I've seen other complaints and I've seen intentions to file complaints at different levels by different people. And I'm just wondering if there's any way to, you have to, I don't know what you can do about that to suss out the false allegations from the beginning. But
Floyd, would you like to address the?
I'll let John,
sorry if I'm.
I'll let John.
Okay, yeah, when a complaint comes to us, we're gonna take a look at it and make a determination of legal sufficiency. And if we find that it falls outside of jurisdiction or allegations, if proven true, wouldn't result in a violation of the ethics code, then the complaint comes to an end at that point. So we don't really incur the cost. I think in the past, there's been issues where the legal sufficiency has been found. We go to the probable cause panel. In the past, I think those have had fees reimbursed at that point. But that's a city commission issue, really, on whether they get reimbursed for fees or not. We just continue, and they're entitled to have a lawyer if they need one.
Of course. But if the complaints are not lodged at the city commission level and they are in fact lodged at the CRA or the blueprint level, and it does rise, I just see it, I see some CRA issues are coming back and some blueprint are and some aren't, and I'm just not sure what I'm not asking a solid.
I'm not sure I understand your question, but basically, when we get a complaint, we look to see if it's within our jurisdiction and if it meets one of the ordinances that's in the charter or in the city ordinance. And if it meets that, and if what's alleged, we ask ourselves, is it true? If this were true, would it be a violation of the ordinance? If so, generally, we act on it. Sometimes, though, we may seek additional information before we act on it to make sure it is something of sustenance before we move forward. And there have been instances where we looked at additional information and moved forward and looked at additional information and said, even we can resolve this right now, and we do. There are people who would like to weaponize this board, and we're aware of that, but it doesn't get in the way of us doing our job because it's going to follow the same process regardless of who, what, when, where. And, so we are looking at it substantively to see if it's legally sufficient within the parameters I stated. If someone frivolously gives us a complaint, there are actions that the board can take within the city ordinance to have them pay for it. So there are actions that the board can take, but we don't make assumptions one way or the other. We deal with it on a case-by-case basis.
I appreciate you. Thank you for letting me ask.
Thank you. Have any more comments?
I believe that's it.
All right. Moving on to agenda item 14. Any member discussions regarding items for future meetings? All right. All right, and directives. Action item 15, memory serves. We would have our complaint form amended for review the next meeting. Anything else?
Bylaws require
Bylaw.
training.
Right.
And the media relations policy.
Correct. Those 3 items.
Trespassing warrant. Here.
All right, with that, I will remind you all that the next meeting is scheduled for April 19th. And that's at 4 p.m. again here in City Hall. And with that, at 5:36, we are adjourned.
Mr. Smith, that meeting is 10 days before my birthday, but I'm available for an early birthday party, early
See,
gift.
are you even supposed to be in here right now? Check like this is trust me.
There you go, there you go. Look at it.
You're supposed to be in here right now.
Hey, John, can you look into that? I don't have a remedy.